one of the parts of the book I enjoyed so much, and again, it comes out of that scene, but it permeates through, was this sense that Lincoln felt that he was somehow communicating with the founders, that he was somehow, that they were alive in some way, and that he summoned them, and he was actually sort of speaking with them and working things out. And, I presume the way you're thinking of it too, is that Lincoln then joins that pantheon and becomes kind of a source for leadership. I wanted to press you on one particular theme. We were talking a little bit about leadership. And so, my simple way of understanding kind of the American DNA in terms of how we think about leadership, there's this, the founders had sort of two concerns. They certainly had great concern about a king, right? The whole point of the experiment was to be a democracy, non-monarchical. So they feared the king, but they also feared the masses, right? They feared both. And so the whole idea of the founding documents was to somehow work that out. I'm just curious how Lincoln, so Lincoln was probably seen by many as a tyrant, right? And then, later we see other American leaders seen that way. FDR, seen as tyrannical, right? So, how do you think about this sort of American, this DNA, if you will, this sort of anti-king idea, and how that's kind of playing out? Because I see this playing out now as part of our polarized environment that we're in. It somehow seems sort of distinctly American in a way, that we're not going to be taking our direction from the central authorities.
Well, I agree with you that Lincoln felt to an unusual degree that he was communicating with the founders. And I mean that in as strange a sense as it may sound. Like, I think he almost was having private seances with them. And there is a fair amount of evidence, and I write about this, that he really tried to talk to dead people. He could hear them and they could hear him in some way that we don't fully understand. But he wrote poems as a young man about trying to communicate with the dead. He loved Edgar Allan Poe, and his law partner asked him why he liked Poe so much, and he said, because he's so gloomy. And there is a kind of dark side to Lincoln that I was very intrigued by. And I mean, because, the light side of Lincoln is great, and his sense of humor and his clear understanding of our best qualities. That's all good. But there are these strange aspects to Lincoln too. So he's trying to correct. It's a kind of gyroscope that the founders created and set spinning, but it gets out of whack every generation or two. And one way it was getting out of whack in 1860 and 61 is that slavery was supposed to fade away. The founders themselves had expressed the hope that it would fade away. It was a kind of temporary inconvenience for a country talking a lot about freedom and democracy in 1776, but then it got a lot stronger. And Lincoln says that in the Cooper Union Address, that how did it get so strong when the founders wanted it to go away? Then as he comes in, although very weak at the beginning, and becomes extraordinarily strong over his 4-year presidency. I don't think any president, possible exception of FDR, ever reinvented the office itself as totally as Abraham Lincoln did. And that worried many advocates of democracy in other ways. They thought the executive is not supposed to be as strong as it is now under Lincoln. And he really reinvented what the US government was. It did 100 times what it had been doing before he came in by the end of his life and his administration. And some of those worries had reasons attached to them. He suspends the writ of habeas corpus. He arrests newspaper editors working in sensitive parts of the country. And he runs roughshod over his political opponents, but he never loses sight of the big picture, I would argue. He submits to a very difficult re-election campaign in 1864. There are moments when it looks like that's not going to go his way. He does some slightly funky things to help it go his way, including he sends soldiers back to their home districts to help in a state like Pennsylvania it could go either way. But he never suspends the election itself. And I mean, on that note, I might say parenthetically, that's a specific Democratic fear that I feel in 2020, that the 2020 election is very fragile and it could be suspended or postponed or the result contested, and it's pretty easy to contest a result afterwards. So I hope all of us from both parties will keep an eye on the November election and just keep it as honest as it can be. And if we have to mail in our ballots, that's fine. There's very little need to worry about a mail-only election if it comes to that, although I hope we can vote in person. But, the best thing Lincoln does, it's not just submitting to a re-election campaign, but he talks so beautifully about what democracy is, and he gives strength to democracy through his words. And his first inaugural does that beautifully. Gettysburg probably does it better than any speech in American history, although it does subtle things to kind of change the gyroscope of what he, as Gary Wills wrote in Lincoln at Gettysburg, Lincoln substitutes a version of democracy that he likes better over the one that the founders had written in. And then in his second inaugural address and in a few other minor speeches, and I found interesting some speeches to Ohio regiments in which he talks a lot about the 20th century. He talks a lot about the grandchildren of these young men and how what they're doing will make democracy safe for Americans of the 20th century.